All right, so that's Vietnam for you. Let's move on to what's happening around the world. Remember that we said there's a lot of brand new and youngish nations in the world at this time, and they all have to make a choice: democracy or communism. Let's look at Puerto Rico first. Remember, we took Puerto Rico after the Spanish-American War, so they are an American territory. They became fully self-governing not until 1952. I think this whole Cold War thing made us realize if we're pro-democracy, maybe we should let Puerto Rico have a democracy and vote for their own leaders. So here's Time magazine uh, honoring Puerto Rico's Governor Munoz Marin. It says democracy's laboratory in Latin America. There. Let's show that a Caribbean nation can be a powerful, rich, successful democracy. Communism, no good, but democracy works in Puerto Rico and it'll work for you too. It's our little propaganda machine. We had an economic operation called Operation Bootstrap. We're going to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And that really did help Puerto Rico become very rich. We were investing in infrastructure and industrial capacities. Oil refineries. They found some oil nearby, so built a lot of oil refineries. Then there was a massive tourism boom, and we started advertising tourism in Puerto Rico a lot more. So that helped make them rather rich and successful, at least compared to their neighbors. And Puerto Rico became strongly capitalist, strongly democracy. They are not going to follow several other Latin American nations into communism. Vast resources are all throughout South America and Central America. They have beautiful farmland that can grow bananas and sugar and coffee and cocoa and all sorts of wonderful things. They could be very, very rich, but they've had terrible governments. Their governments are so terrible, they go through a civil war every few years. And that's, of course, really bad for the economy, too, even if good guys win. So there's been evil dictators and civil war and terrible governments throughout a lot of Central and South American history, which unfortunately means that when there's a new idea, someone new to the block says, hey, try communism, it'll be great. They go, oh, okay, we've tried everything else, except, democracy. America has not always been the best neighbor to South and Central America. So when America says, hey, everybody, join our side, there's unfortunately a lot of little guys that said, we remember how America kind of got their way, no matter if you liked it or not. You remember Teddy Roosevelt? I like Teddy Roosevelt, but his whole big stick policy was kind of bullying to some tiny nations who felt like they had to do whatever America said or else, and they did not like that. So there's some bad feelings here, and when someone says, hey, join America, we're your buddy, they're like, no, you're not. Communism was appealing. They're poor countries, they're countries with civil unrest, and whoever promises to fix things, you listen to them. When Nixon visited Venezuela once, and today Venezuela is probably the best example of really, really poor, failed communist country in South America. He visited, and there was an angry crowd that broke several windows in his car. So that's scary. I don't think Nixon visited again, but that's what they feel about America and democracy and capitalism. They don't like us very much in Venezuela. Happening in Cuba. In 1952, this man, Fulgencio Batista, became the dictator of Cuba. He is pro-American, pro-capitalist, not necessarily pro-democracy, pro-capitalist, which is not the same thing. He knows that capitalism will make him a lot of money, and he knows that being best friends with America will make him a lot of money. But he's not good to his own people. He does not allow free and fair elections. He's in charge, and he has a secret police and military to make everyone do what he says. America kept close ties with Cuba because Americans owned a lot of land in Cuba. We had massive sugar plantations and tobacco plantations in Cuba, and they were making us a lot of money. So we were best friends with Fulgencio. Not a good guy, but he made America money, so he's our buddy. He hates communism because remember, communism says kill the rich and take their stuff, and he's like, but I'm rich. Don't kill me. Don't take my stuff. So he's not a good person, but he's capitalist. The rich grew very, very, very rich because they all have close ties with the government, and the government's basically embezzling all the people's tax money and shoveling it towards the rich and famous. And the rich get richer, and the poor are oppressed. And the poor are looking at the rich and saying, you're being so awful to us, why wouldn't I shoot you and take all your stuff? And, I see their point. We need a Robin Hood. In comes Fidel Castro. Not exactly Robin Hood, but that's who they go for. These are all classic arguments for communism. The government is corrupt. And the government was really corrupt. The rich are stealing all our money. And they were. The rich will never give us a fair chance. And they won't. And so they say, let's go communist. Unfortunately, they think that Batista is the symbol of capitalism. And he's not doing it right. Capitalism allows a free and open playing field for everyone. Capitalism says you are free to do whatever you want with your time and your money. And Batista's not allowing freedom of economics. He's only allowing that for the rich people, for the powerful people, not for the normal people. So he's not a poster child of capitalism. And a lot of people today point to Batista as failed capitalism. I'm like, it is failed capitalism. Failed, and that is not capitalism. It's capitalism for the rich and oppression and theft for the poor. If they went from bad, unfair, half capitalism to real capitalism, it would have done a lot better than under communism, which is not good for anyone. So here's Fidel Castro. He attempted a coup and he lost and he got thrown in jail, and then they let him go. Reminds me very much of Hitler. And he kept on trying and kept on trying till he succeeded, which is exactly what Hitler did. Hitler tried a coup, failed, got thrown in jail, was let out, tried a few more times, and he won. So now we have Fidel Castro eventually released, trying until he did win in 1959. Ooh, look at that. All police on alert. There's a plot to kill Castro. Batista was not good. He was an evil dictator. He was selfish. He was greedy. Fidel Castro was really, really bad, though. He started imprisoning and executing thousands and thousands of people with fake trials, mock trials. It wasn't even trying to provide justice. It's not even a different idea about justice. It's just kill and imprison whoever I don't like. No freedom of speech, no freedom of the press. Do what I say or you're in big, big trouble. Stealing all the rich people's stuff, which I get it. The rich people were jerks, but you can't just take all their stuff, okay? He seized about $1 billion worth of property. $1 billion from all the rich and famous people. And did he distribute it equally to the poor and needy? No, he kept it for himself and his goons, which means that they've traded one rich, powerful, greedy dictator for another rich, powerful, greedy dictator. Only this one gives a lot of lip service to the poor, but doesn't actually help the poor. Their economy nosedived, especially after America stopped trading with them. We were their biggest trade partner, and we said, we're not going to do business with you anymore. So they said, fine, we'll trade with Russia, who's only 10,000 miles further away than you. And that didn't work out very well. And Cuba is very poor now. So communism doesn't work. In April 3, 1961, we gave them an ultimatum to stop being communist. They said no. So on April 17th, about 1,600 Cubans who had run away to America, trained by the CIA, invaded again, trying to reinstall, I don't know, real democracy this time. And they utterly failed. I do believe that those shown are the defenders or the communists. They have this quadruple anti-air machine gun. Look at those 4 barrels. That's nasty. Guys in like a recliner. That's crazy. Bay of Pigs was a fiasco. It was just a clown show from start to finish. Dozens of things went wrong. People were given the wrong ammunition. So after they shoot their first clip, they go to reload their guns and it doesn't fit. So you have just a few shots and then you're done. You can't shoot anymore. There was no air support. President Kennedy had promised all these F-16s to come and blow up all the Cuban tanks, and they didn't, and just everything went wrong, and they almost immediately either died or surrendered. And there goes that attempt to retake Cuba. Now there's a communist nation in America's backyard. Eventually, Castro did allow us to ransom those surviving Cubans who were imprisoned for $53 million in food and medicine. Because now that communism has been around for just a couple years, they don't have enough food and they don't have enough medicine. Okay. Okay. Now I know in America sometimes there's shortages. There was a TP shortage, but there's a national pandemic, so I understand shortages. In normal years in America, we don't have shortages of anything. We have excesses of everything, which is not great either for our national health. But this is very strong evidence that communism doesn't work because after just a couple years, they can't feed themselves. They don't have enough medicine. Communism does not work. And of course, we have the Cuban Missile Crisis. We put missiles in Turkey, so they put missiles in Cuba. This is back when missiles had a fairly short range, so we had to get our missiles as close as possible. They found out, so they got their missiles as close as possible. We found out about their missiles, so we blockaded Cuba and said no more Russian ships are allowed to enter. So they almost started a war about that, but didn't. For more information, watch X-Men First Class. Very historically accurate. We almost nuked each other, but ended up not, as you can tell by us all being alive. Secretary of State or someone said, we're eyeball to eyeball, and I think the other fellow just blinked. This was probably the closest we actually got to nuking one another. There was a Russian sub commander who said that his sub was given orders to nuke America, and you need 3 officers to turn a key at the same time, and 2 officers put their key in, and the 3rd officer said no. I'm not going to nuke America because I have family in Moscow, and Moscow's first on their target if we nuke them. I don't know if that story is true or not, but we were this close to killing everyone in the entire world. And then we didn't. 13 days of probably the most tense days in American history. Both sides said, we'll take our missiles out of Turkey, you take your missiles out of Cuba, we won't kill each other. Yay. Here's some reconnaissance photos. So we had millions of photos taken of Cuba, and we had, office workers looking at each photo. Trees, cow, tobacco, nukes. Wait, what? Imagine if your job was to look at this map and look at this picture and say, I think that's a missile silo. Ah! There's Khrushchev and Fidel Castro hugging because they're best friends. On the left here in this map, there's different ranges for different size weapons. We knew they could nuke anywhere in like Florida, New Orleans. If they had longer range missiles, they might have gotten all the way up to DC. And if they had those longest range possible, they could hit just about anywhere in America or Canada, which was very scary. Ultimatum to Khrushchev, move those missiles. No! U.S. imposes arms blockade on Cuba on finding offensive missile sites. Kennedy ready for Soviet showdown. Also notice on the left underneath the word Kennedy, it says Chinese open new front, use tanks against Indians. The Chinese are invading the Indian border. That's also very scary. These newspapers are rather scary. And then finally, Khrushchev offers to scrap Cuba bases. Kennedy calls it a statesmanlike decision, an aid to peace. Oh, it's very gentlemanly of you to not kill everyone in the world. Yay! And there on the right, U.S. would renounce Cuba attack and blockade. So we're going to undo our blockade, free waters, and we promise we will not invade Cuba anymore. It's happening in Panama. In 1977, Carter gave the Panama Canal Zone back to Panama because there were a bunch of communists in Panama and they were causing trouble and there was all these anti-American feelings. And Carter said, if we do something really nice for Panama, maybe that'll make them like us. It didn't. Many Americans thought giving it up was a bad move because it was making us a lot of money. And he gave it up. Panama was untrustworthy and hostile. They had an evil dictator who openly said he did not like America, and why are we giving him this really awesome gift with a lot of money attached? It also seems very weak when there's a tiny little nation like Panama. It's like, we don't like you, America. America's like, you want all our money? And they're like, yes, we'll take all your money. We still don't like you. So, yeah, I don't think he should have done that. But he's trying to be nice. He's trying to prove that America's not the great Satan and all that. But there you go. Unfortunately, it did not make Panama like us anymore. And guerrilla and terrorist communist, action increased in that area. Maybe it increased because they thought of America as weaker now. Not good. All right, what's happening in Africa? Here's the Belgian Republic of the Congo. capital Kinshasa, right in the center of Africa, sorry. They only gained their freedom in 1960, their freedom from Belgium. 1960 is when they stopped being a colony. They had zero training for independence. It was just one day, hey, you're your own country now. Why don't you try to make a government? What? See, it was difficult for our founding fathers to write a constitution, but America has had some self-government since 1620. So America had a lot of practice runs before we made our actual self-governing, central government. We had a ton. We had hundreds of years of practice, and they just tell these Congolese, okay, good luck, have a government, you figure it out. Did not work out very well. Immediately there's a civil war, and it's not just, good guys versus bad guys. There's like 10 different groups that all want power, and I doubt if any of them have the people's best interest at heart. Everyone's killing each other, and it gets really, really bad. Belgian and UN peacekeepers go in to try to keep the peace. There's a dictator who wins eventually, who is communist. His name is Patrice Lumumba, and he's backed by the Soviets. He's getting Soviet weapons and money and supplies. Lumumba was assassinated. He was deposed and then assassinated, and things had calmed down a little bit. But once the communist leader is assassinated, the rest of the communists get really mad and they fight some more. In 61, a large province tried to secede from the country. So now it's not just a war for who's in charge, but now there's like a war of secession, like the American Civil War. And everyone's killing one another, and it's really, really nasty. And it's not just, the regular humdrum terrors of war. The communists are going full murder, rampage, terrorism, thousands upon thousands of murders. There is a terrorist group called the Lions, which in Congolese is Simba. So they run through these villages that are suspected to be non-communist, shouting Simba, 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 stabbing everyone with their bayonets and with their knives. I know a missionary family that there was like 3. There's a missionary family that sent like 60 extended family members throughout Africa over the course of like 80 years. So this, family upon family, aunts and uncles and cousins and kids are all going there and back again. And there was a girl at Northland when I was there whose grandparents were in Congo, and early one morning, they hear shouts in the distance, Simba, Simba, Simba. They're like, oh, stink. So they grab, a couple supplies and race into the jungle. And they travel by foot in the middle of dense jungle. And, there's snakes and mosquitoes and crocodiles and who knows what. And they have to go like 100 miles to the nearest town. They finally get picked up by a helicopter, brought to Kinshasa, and then flown back to America. So just crazy, but thousands upon thousands of horrible murders and tortures. There was this massive hostage taking event in one of their big cities that they were asking for all this money and stuff. We sent in Belgian paratroopers to try to rescue them. They caught wind of that and started murdering the hostages. 30 of them were executed. In all, there were about 80 white people killed. A lot of them are American. Almost every one of these 80 foreigners were missionaries. If they weren't missionaries, then they were secular human rights helpers like Doctors Without Borders and Red Cross workers and things like that. They're all there to help the people, and they get brutally tortured and murdered because they're Western. So really, really sad. For the next 20 years or so, no missionaries are allowed into the Congo. Really sad. And then in South Africa, we have apartheid. If you know anything about apartheid, it is probably the worst case of the most extreme racism in modern history. Jimmy Carter, his whole thing in foreign policy is human rights and treating people well, and he stopped supporting evil dictators who are anti-communist. So for decades throughout the Cold War, America has been helping evil, brutal people who don't like communism. People like Batista in Cuba, who said, I don't like communism because they're going to come after me because I'm rich. And they're not good. They murder their own people. They torture their own people. And America's like, here's a bunch of guns to help you kill your own people as long as you shoot the Russians if they ever come a knocking. And Jimmy Carter says, we're not going to do that anymore. And Becca is really mad at Jimmy Carter. Becca thinks that we should keep on supporting wicked, cruel, awful, terrible people because at least they're not communist. And I don't know why it's worse if a communist murders someone than if a capitalist murders someone. If you have a brutal dictator, I really don't care what his excuse for being a dictator is. Batista's excuse for being a dictator is, I want to be in charge. The communist excuse is, I want to be communist. Either way, they're murdering their own people. So I really don't see an excuse. So there is, some truth in saying that when Jimmy Carter stopped supporting some wicked people, some of them got overthrown. Sometimes they got overthrown by even worse people, either, similar bad guys or sometimes even worse. And that does go to show you there's no easy answer in foreign policy. Sometimes America does do some pretty awful things for nice reasons. Does the end justify the means, though? Becca seems to think so. Becca says, as long as they're anti-communist, it doesn't matter what they do. I do not approve of that, and that's one reason why we're going to Bob Jones next year. I do not like what Becca said, and I did write a strongly worded letter to several people today, so we'll see how that works out. One great example of a nation that's very, very capitalist and very pro-Western and anti-communist, but is also awful, 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 is South Africa. They are very capitalist. They are very Western in culture. There's a lot of white people there, British and Dutch, and they are anti-communist. They're also anti-black. So, they're terrible people. They're throwing people in jail. They're executing people. It is way worse than civil rights in America, especially by Carter's time. Things had been getting a lot better. But segregation, Jim Crow laws, the worst that America's had, 100 times better than apartheid, which was just absolutely awful. I like how, this young lady has a very compelling side. Apartheid is wrong. Yeah, no kidding. This is institutional racism at its worst. There is a movie that I used to watch when I was a little kid on VHS called The Color of Freedom, and I just saw that it's on Disney Plus. I highly recommend that you go watch The Color of Freedom if you have Disney Plus, or if you have a buddy with Disney Plus, go over to their house and watch The Color of Freedom. It is a very sweet story about a kid from South Africa who goes on a, student exchange program to America. And she's white, and she goes to live with a senator's family, and the senator's black. And she had no idea. The black senator's family wanted an African teen to come live with them. They have a teen girl, wanted a teen girl to come live with them for the semester so that they can learn what it's like to be black in Africa. And the white South African wanted to go to America to learn what it's like to be white in America, and they end up learning from each other. It is a little cheesy, it's from back in the day, but it is so good, and it really, really accurately illustrates what it's like to live in apartheid South Africa, and then to come to America. And was America perfect with race relations at the time? No! We had a long way to go, and we've come a long way since then, and we still have a long way to go. But America at its worst, so much better. And America at this time, Jimmy Carter's time, we have made strides in racial equality, and South Africa is going backwards. Becca's mad that Carter did not support South Africa despite apartheid. I just can't with these people. We don't support apartheid sport. True sports knows no color, only merit. People say, why are we segregating? What would they be segregating? Cricket? Rugby? I don't know what they would be into. I think they are really into cricket down there. They are British. They say, don't segregate the sports team. Let's just see the best players on the team. True sports knows no color, only merit. Good for you. Caution, beware of natives. Okay. Free South Africa, abolish apartheid. Oh, sorry. Here's a bunch of white and black teams working together. And here again, legal now, immoral forever. end apartheid. All right, so we are talking about communism and its spread and people fighting, for democracy or for capitalism throughout the world, and a lot of these smaller countries that might still be very influential, but maybe do not have deep ties to either communism or capitalism, and both sides are trying to pull them. And the Middle East is a classic example of small nations that might be bullied or persuaded one way or the other, but are very, very important. And why, class, is the Middle East very, very valuable? Oil. Here's a picture of Eisenhower and Nixon and some Saudi guy. The Middle East was deeply desired by both sides for its oil. Whichever side gets it would be great in a war. Whoever doesn't get it would be, rather hard pressed during wartime. The Eisenhower Doctrine was our foreign policy towards the Middle East that says we cannot let them be communist. And so we spent $200 million trying to bribe them. I mean, trying to build up their economy to show them how wonderful capitalism is. We cannot let them fall into enemy hands. See, the thing is, the Arabs, the Muslims, they tended to really hate America, but they also tended to really hate the communists. They were not a fan of either side, which was not great for us, but it could have been worse, I guess. Here is Nasser, president of Egypt, Gamal Nasser. Uh, as president of Egypt, he is highly Muslim. He hates Israel. He supports all sorts of terrorist raids on Israel. Not good. He built up his army trying to become the leader of the Muslim world, trying to be, the power in the Middle East, which he was for a while. He also is saying how much he wants to just be a, peaceful industrial nation. We just want to be a modern nation like all you guys. And he plays both sides for their help. He's asking America for a lot of money for these, infrastructure things that we're spending cash all over the place trying to get people to like us and like capitalism. See, if you want go capitalist, you have a lot of money, which is very true. And of course, the communists are throwing out AK-47s like candy, and he's playing both sides. I don't think he likes either side. I think he just likes our money and guns, so he takes them. The Aswan Dam is an example of that. He dammed the Nile for the first time in history. Massive, massive project. Ended the floods in the Nile, which is a classic part of being Egyptian. But it did greatly help the farming situation and prevented bad flooding. Made the water a lot more even throughout the year, irrigation methods and all that. So America gave him millions of dollars to help build that dam until we found out that he was getting a lot of stuff from Russia. We're like, dude, you're just playing us. And we quit the project and he had to finish it by himself. So it was very difficult for him, but he did it eventually. He's all mad that America pulls out of the project, so he stole all French and English property around and took the canal. When I say nationalized, that means he says the canal belongs to Egypt now, and by Egypt I mean me, President Nasser. I control the canal. It's mine. This is one of the world's most strategic spots, and now we have a hostile controlling it who is very mad at England, France, and America at the moment. Even though he's not a big friend of Russia, he's much madder at us right now, and that's a big problem. Nasser blocked Israeli ships from going through the canal and started more terrorist attacks. And in response, Israel invaded October 1956. Israel's like, we've had it with your terrorist attacks. We're coming for you. Remember, Egypt is trying to be the world's powerhouse or the Middle East powerhouse, and Israel's like, yeah, we can take you. Starts attacking, and they do get all the way to the Suez Canal eventually. So Egypt sank a bunch of ships in the middle of the canal. So, if I can't have it, no one can have it. Remember how recently the Ever Given got stuck in the canal and that caused billions and billions of dollars worth of delays? Well, guess what happens back then? Exact same thing. Only now it's not a ship that's just stuck in the sand. Now it's multiple ships that are sunk in the middle of the canal. You can't just push it and tug it out of the way. This is going to be a months-long effort trying to get these ships out of the way so that we can use the canal again. He's being a real brat. He's causing billions of dollars in lost trade revenue around the world. Meanwhile, some of his allies in Syria blew up a bunch of oil pipelines. So now the world is not getting the gasoline that it needs, and the whole world is freaking out. Britain and France sent soldiers to go try to seize the canal. And when they did that, Russia said, if you do not back off, we will invade Egypt as well, and we'll have World War III in the Middle East. And so everyone said, okay, let's all leave. And all sides decided to withdraw. They forced Israel to give up all the territory it gained. Israel's like, no fair. We won this in battle fair and square. The canal's ours now. And the UN said, if you do not give it back, there will be World War III, so you have to give it back. And Israel's like, fine. We'll give you back your stupid canal. Not before we take an epic picture of Israeli soldiers swimming in the Suez Canal that we conquered fair and square before the UN made us go home. 10 nations were sent by the UN to patrol that area and keep the area safe for ships of all nations. And they say for a few years, trying to keep the Suez Canal safe and neutral. Speaking of Israel, Israel was in trouble since the day it was born. This Suez crisis was just the latest in a series. In 1948, Israel became an independent nation for the first time in a very, very long time. Just some quick Israeli history for you. So, Moses and Joshua came into the promised land and they have their judges and then the kings, and then Assyria and Babylon conquer them and take them away. So that's the first time they stop being a nation, is when Babylon takes them away. Then after 70 years, Ezra and Nehemiah lead a lot of people back to Israel, and they're a nation again for a very short time. And then biblical history ends, but we have non-biblical history that tells you the rest. In between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's about 400 years. And during that 400-year time, Alexander the Great conquers everyone, including Israel. So Israel is conquered by the Greeks for a while, and then we have the Maccabees Wars, and then Greek territory is all captured by Rome, and then Rome is there for a little while, and of course Jesus is born, and then after Rome falls, there's all this chaos, and then the Muslim empires take over, and the Ottoman Empire controlled them until World War I. Then after that, England took a large chunk of the Middle East, including Israel, and England controlled Israel until 1948. They kept on saying, yeah, soon, you could be your own country soon. And Israel said, eventually, enough's enough. We're independent. What are you going to do about it, England? And England's like, nothing. You can be independent. And immediately, every single one of its neighbors attacked. I think there were like 7 nations that attacked in the next couple weeks. And Israel beat them all. Very impressive. By the way, within moments of them declaring on the radio, we are now an independent nation, America said, we recognize Israel as an independent nation. We were the first nation to do so. Pretty cool. And Israel won a war for its survival days after it declared independence. Then came that Suez conflict we just talked about in 1956, just a few years later. And then in 67 was the 6 Days War. This is one of the most epic wars in history. So all these nations around Israel start preparing these huge armies right on the border. And Israel's like, well, we're not going to wait for you to attack us. We're going to attack you first. And with massive preemptive airstrikes, they crippled the enemy armies before they could attack. 6 days, and the fighting's over. So Egypt had about 300 airplanes, and that was the biggest air force in the Middle East. And Israel launched a series of bombing raids on Egyptian Air Force sites and destroyed most of them on the ground, winning air superiority in a single day, which is pretty epic. You can see how greatly they're outnumbered by 5 different nations, all trying to attack them and destroy them. There's an awesome story. During all this air attack in Egypt, they decided to leave 2 F-16s in the South Israeli Air Force Base to defend Israel. All our Air Force is going to go attack, and we're going to leave 2 at home. These 2 Air Force planes, F-16s, I think, F-15s? I think they were 16s. Anyway. They're left at home, and the air raid sirens go off, so they scramble up in the air. There are 7 Russian MiGs coming at them. I think they were Egyptian piloted, but, Russian aircraft, really good, almost as good as F-16s. 7 of them against 2 F-16s. So they go screaming in and shoot off their machine guns. and both of the Israelis score a hit. So now it's 2 against 5. Then one of the guys, one of the Israeli F-16s, calls the first one and says, "Sorry, my machine gun just jammed. I have to go home. I'm going to land quickly on JAMA as fast as I can and then come back up here." And now it's 1 against 5. Not one guy says, "Well, I'm the only thing defending all of Israel, so I better get going." He shot down 3 more and shot another 4th one until it was smoking, but managed to limp home, and the 7th one managed to go. So 2 against 7, then 1 against 5, and they totally win. And this is stories like this are happening all up and down Israel, how they're just conquering everyone around them, these lightning fast attacks, doing very, very well. In that fighting, Israel won the Sinai Peninsula, that's that triangle right next to the Suez Canal. They win the West Bank, including the capital city Jerusalem, the West Bank of the Jordan, and the Golan Heights, which is just north of Israel. Even today, those 3 territories are highly disputed. Who actually owns them? Jimmy Carter actually wrote a book a while ago claiming that the Palestinians own them, so I don't agree with that. But they need peace. They need peace. I'm firmly on Israel's side, but I don't want Israel to keep on fighting everyone around them. At this point, though, I mean, even until today, in the 50s all the way up to today, it seems like Israel has to fight for its very survival. And if other people will play nice, then Israel wants to play nice too. Then in 73, there was a surprise attack on Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. This is Israel's best, highest holy day. And there was a surprise attack, and the bad guys did manage to get far into Israel, and it looked bad for a while, but America came to the rescue, and they did manage to push everyone back, but with great losses. But Israel's been in multiple fights for its survival, and it's always won. Here in the pirate eye patch is Moshe Dayan, a famous Israeli general. Did some pretty amazing things during that war. Look up Moshe Dayan sometime. Read a biography of him. He's pretty epic. Finally, we come to the Camp David Accords. In 1978, Jimmy Carter invited Israel and Egypt to America to talk this out. The Camp David Accords actually began by request of the Egyptian president, Anwar Sadat, which is surprising that one of Israel's enemies would come forward and say, "I want to make peace." Anwar Sadat of Egypt, Menachem Begin of Israel, and Jimmy Carter all met at Camp David, which is the president's getaway. This is like a wilds camp just for the president, and many presidents have gone there on vacation. It's in Maryland, so not too far from the White House, but very famous talks. These talks took weeks, and they were not easy. Even though the Egyptian president went there hoping for peace, there were multiple times when they refused to talk to one another. And one of them would talk to Jimmy Carter, and he'd go into the next room and talk to the other one, and then he'd bring their messages back and forth. And sounds kind of crazy, but they worked at it, and finally they made a path to peace, and all 3 of them shook hands and said, "We will not fight each other anymore." This is literally the very first peace treaty that Israel and any Arab nation ever had. This is the very first Arab nation that recognized that Israel is a nation and has the right to exist. We will not try to kick you back into the ocean. This in 1978, 30 years after Israel declared itself a nation, declared its independence. 30 years later, Egypt says, "We will recognize you." Several other Muslim nations don't recognize them still. It's kind of crazy. Sadat is definitely not pro-Israeli by any means, but he is pro-peace, and just for his willingness to live without murdering his neighbors, he gets assassinated on the airport runway on the way home. It's so sad. The Egyptians do not agree with their president, "Let's have peace with Israel." He's assassinated for trying to help. Other, not main, but Middle East events. In 1958, Egypt and Syria united into the United Arab Republic. They were only united for a short time, but they worked together for multiple attacks on Israel. I'm sure Israel did not appreciate being in the middle there. Arab nationalists seized power in both Lebanon and Iraq, and there's civil wars there. And you have, when I say nationalists here, we mean like really pro-Muslim, everything very strict, very terrorist-centered. The Lebanese government, which was much more democratic and pro-Western, asked for the UN and the US to help them out. So America sent 5,000 Marines to keep the peace in Lebanon. Lebanon was very different from other Middle Eastern countries in that it was a rather peaceful nation at the time. They were famous for banking. They were called the Switzerland of the Middle East. They had many international banks there, and one reason for that is they were also a shipping destination. Uh, Shipping containers from all over the Middle East would come up through the Suez Canal and stop over in Lebanon. And because they had so much international business, they had international banks. And because of both those things, they made a lot of money. Because they were so internationally recognized, they also had a lot of tourism. It's a beautiful place. All of the Middle East is really pretty. Most of it is pretty with a lot of guns and bombs going off, but Lebanon was pretty and peaceful. So there were a lot of Americans and Europeans who went on vacation to Lebanon. And of course, these hardcore Muslim terrorists don't like white people coming in and disturbing their terrorist activities. So troublemakers started a civil war in Lebanon. And maybe you know that in the 80s, they blew up a marine compound, but we're not in the 80s yet. So, there's this nasty civil war in Lebanon and everything gets blown up. And now no one goes on a vacation to the Middle East anymore. Very sad. Uh, OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, starts embargoing or raising the price on gasoline to America like crazy because we helped Israel in multiple wars. So from 73 to 79, there were multiple cases of them either refusing to sell us gas, or jacking up the prices. Here we have in the background gas shortages. You can only buy 10 gallons of gas per day. So we said, how can we make sure we're not dependent on terrorists for our gasoline? And one way we can do that is try to make more of our own. And so we built this pipeline going from the very top of Alaska all the way down south that would supply the West Coast with a ton of gasoline, and it worked really well. It's called the Trans-Alaska Pipeway. It goes through, 1,000 miles of forests and wilderness. And of course, that's where the buffalo roam and the deer and the antelope play. So we got to put it up. That's actually really high off the ground. That's like 15 or 20 feet off the ground. I know it looks really small, but those are massive, and the caribou herds go right underneath it, which is nice. It's nice that we're not impacting the environment all that much. And we're getting a lot of our oil. Today, 50% of our petroleum comes from Canada, or not 50% of our petroleum, 50% of our petroleum imports comes from Canada. A lot of other more friendly nations have found oil since the 60s and 70s. So we buy a lot of our oil from friendlies like Ecuador instead of maybe not so friendlies like Iraq. All right, what's going on in Iran? In 1979, there was a coup, as there are in a lot of different places in the world at this time. The guy on the left here, the king, his name was Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. Shah is actually his title, means king. He is the dictator of Iran. He's not a good guy. He has secret police, he has torture chambers, no freedom of speech, no freedom of the press, throws people in jail on a whim. But he's very pro-Western and very modern. He is overthrown by Ayatollah Khamenei, or Khomeini, as your book calls him. Ayatollah is not his name. Ayatollah is a title, which is like a Muslim pope. He is the Muslim pope of Iran. So he's not trying to be a politician. He's trying to be the religious leader of Iran. And he is a diehard classic Muslim terrorist. If you think of a caricature of a Muslim terrorist, that's this guy. Okay? Bad, bad, bad guy. As bad as Pahlavi was, Khomeini, way, way, way worse. And he took Iran back into the Dark Ages, back into the Middle Ages. Again, your book criticizes Jimmy Carter for not helping Shah Pahlavi enough, but, ends don't justify the means. Here's a before picture of Iran in the 1970s. This is the University of Tehran. First of all, terrorists don't like universities. Here's a university where young women can go and learn to be doctors and lawyers, and they can do anything. This is a Muslim nation. Look at that girl in the middle rocking the avocado turtleneck. The high heels, avocado colors, very 70s fashion. They're very, very Western in culture. And the Ayatollah puts a stop to all that and makes them walk in town with blankets all over, takes away women's rights to a shocking extreme. and makes Iran probably the most active terrorist nation in the world for a while, though, of course, Iraq and Afghanistan compete for that title. Um, George W. Bush called Iran part of the axis of evil. They're a nasty, nasty country. But not that long ago, they were a modern Western nation, and Khomeini ruined it all. I wonder if they'll ever go back. One of the first things Khomeini did is attack our embassy, and he took 66 American ambassadors hostage. This is a huge problem in the international community. Even if you really, really hate a nation, the worst you're supposed to do to them, their ambassadors, is give them a free plane ticket home and say, we don't like you. It's called PNGing them, persona non grata, where you kick them out of the country and say, we don't want you here. I mean, even in World War II, what did we do with the Nazi ambassadors? We kicked them out. That's it. We didn't hurt them at all. Even throw them in jail. We kicked them out. When we were talking with the Japanese ambassadors and then Pearl Harbor happened, we were ticked at those Japanese ambassadors for pretending to want peace, and we're so mad at them. And do we throw them in jail? Nope. We send them back home to Japan. And when Iran is bad at us, we're guessing that they're going to kick our ambassadors out, but then they capture them and throw them in jail, and not a nice jail either. And the whole world's going, dude, you can't do that. You can't shoot the messenger. They're just messengers. You can't hurt the ambassadors, and they will. And that just goes to show you, Khomeini, he's not just a bad guy. He's like next level crazy. He releases 14 of them. I think a couple of them had medical problems, but he kept 52 for over a year, 444 days. Carter tried to negotiate for their release, but Khomeini does not want American stuff. He does not want or need our money. There are no favors that he wants from America. All he wants to do is hurt America, so he has no reason to release those hostages. America, in retaliation, froze a lot of Iranian assets. You know, there are Iranian businesses with stuff in America, with property and with bank accounts, so he froze all those. And he said, you know, we'll give all that back as a ransom, and we'll give you millions of dollars to ransom our people. They said no. Jimmy Carter authorized a rescue attempt. I believe there is a movie with Ben Affleck where they show that. I haven't seen it. Unfortunately, it failed. The Canadians helped an awful lot. It was mostly a Canadian rescue attempt for whatever reason, and it failed. Several of our people died in a helicopter crash, and it just was not to be. So we did not try again. Finally, Iraq invaded Iran. Oh, wow. And the Iraq-Iran War, very cleverly titled. And so they needed cash, and they didn't need a second enemy. And then Reagan started campaigning for president. And one thing Reagan said is, you know, Jimmy Carter's nice and all, but I'm going to, you know, really flex our muscles. And one of the things he talked about on the campaign trail is, you know, what I'm going to do to get our people home, not negotiate. I'm going to go get our people home. And so the Iranian said, you know, the offer that Jimmy's giving us is probably the best offer we're going to get, and we need that cash. So they said, fine, we will take that ransom money and we'll let him go the day that Jimmy Carter's out of office and Reagan's back, Reagan's in office. So that's exactly what happened. Our people were released 444 days later.